The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Aaron Larson. I am with the Dibble Institute, and I am excited to welcome everyone to today's webinar with Marline Pearson, who's joining us from the wonderful territory of Puerto Rico. And before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items. And so, Marline, go ahead and go to the next slide. If you do end up with any audio issues where it's difficult to hear, then we do have the phone number that was sent to you in the email, as well as the access code, and so you can join us that way. And then next slide. So just a little bit real quick about the Dibble Institute. The Dibble Institute was actually started by Charlie and Helen Dibble a number of years ago, and Charlie really has an amazing story that we have on our website that you can learn more about Charlie and his motivation for starting the Dibble Institute. And so we invite you to visit our website to learn more about Charlie. So next slide. And the Dibble Institute, what we do is we develop resources to help young adults and teens to learn healthy relationship skills. And one of our authors we have on today, and that's Marline. And so next slide. And at the Dibble Institute, very much what we believe in is we believe in the research. And so we follow the research wherever the research goes. And very much one of our guiding North Stars is that we keep it research-based. So next slide. And the Dibble Institute very much believes in healthy, stable, and safe families. And next slide. And the Dibble Institute also believes that all people deserve respect, that all relationships can benefit from healthy relationship skills, and that's our goal, is to try to help people to access those. Next slide. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the time over to Marline, who's going to share with us some of the insights that she's put together in terms of the power of relationship education for school success.
Well, hello. I take it everybody can hear me. Thanks a lot, everybody who's out there listening. So today I want to focus on why relationship education is really important for youth, for school success, as the title implies, but also I think for life success in general. And when I say relationship education, I am referring to romantic, intimate relationships. Now, I don't know who's out there listening, and maybe you're already convinced of this, and hopefully today you'll hear some new and compelling reasons, and in particular, why it may be so urgently needed right now. Anyways, I want to start by saying that I think in general, we may have really underestimated the role intimate relationships play in the lives of youth, and especially when they go awry. Unhealthy relationships, disrespect, controlling ones, dating violence, difficult breakups, unplanned pregnancy, all of these can really derail a young person's schooling and personal life. And yet, when we think about it, romantic intimate life is an area that we almost totally ignore in addressing the needs of teens and young adults. You know, whether it's school success, career success, or whether it's prevention and intervention initiatives to support vulnerable youth, rarely is healthy relationship education and skills a part of the mix in helping youth succeed. It's truly a missing piece. And this is true for teens as much as it is for 20-somethings. And yet the love choices and sex choices that they make can really impact their current and future lives in really major ways, for better or for worse. I want to tell you a little bit about how I really came to this conviction about the importance of relationship education and how it really is a critical missing piece in our efforts to support student success. It really begins with my experience as a community college teacher, which I have been for a long time, and it helps explain how a sociologist with a focus on criminology came to develop programs, relationship programs for teens and young adults. What I've seen up close in 3 decades of teaching is how relationship troubles and unplanned pregnancies can easily derail the progress young people make at school. Many of my students have histories of challenge growing up, Many of them have grown up in stressed families, unstable families, and many support themselves with very few resources from the outside or from their families. Some have been involved in substance abuse, involvement in the system, and quite a few are young parents. Nonetheless, they make their way to the community college, and they truly are amazing young people. It's such a privilege to teach them. But what I saw and what broke my heart was how they could make progress in their classes and in the programs they were in. And also some of them on the outside in their personal lives with recovery, with parenting, and then boom, involved in the drama of a bad relationship, an unplanned pregnancy, or a second unplanned pregnancy, setback, derailed, thrown off track. These relationship troubles can tend to spill over and affect many areas of life. And in fact, unplanned pregnancies and troubled relationship troubles are a very big reason for dropping out of community college. You know, you can ask any college counselor. And so what really became clear to me is that we were missing a very, very important opportunity to help young people succeed. You know, as I talk with my students, many have gotten help with finishing high school, with their GED, with drug treatment, with mentoring, with parenting support, with birth control, with STI, HIV education. But the one area they never got help with was with their love life. And young people really want respectful, affirming love relationships, but many of them have few models, and there's really very little guidance out there to help them navigate their early romantic and sexual lives. And yet those choices can really snag them and set them back. So when I discovered there were some tools to help adult couples in their relationships and marriages, and there was research, you know, really investigating the patterns that protect, the patterns that damage relationships, all I could think of was I needed to adapt these for youth. And, you know, these were some of the leading researchers at the University, John Gottman at Washington and Markman and Stanley at Denver and many others. But anyways, that was the start of my work in developing materials for relationship education for young adults in the college and also for younger teens in the community. I started to put together these research-based relationship skills with other materials to help young people develop healthy and safe relationships. And then something really curious happened that only reinforced to me the power of relationship education. You know, after doing conventional domestic violence, dating violence prevention education for 3 years, and I think I did a pretty good job at it, I was amazed at the impact my classes on relationship skills had on raising consciousness about abusive relationships. I had more students coming to consciousness about the relationships they were in, seeking help, you know, to get out of those relationships than all my years of doing DV prevention work. And I guess what it really taught me was that you can't just educate about what to avoid. People need some confidence that they can achieve something different. They need a pathway to get to good. How do you choose safe partners? How do you better understand the building blocks of healthy relationships? How do you maintain safe relationships, happy, healthy relationships over time? And finally, it seems to me that you can't really talk about romantic life and developing healthy relationships unless you address sexuality. And really, one of the only places that we formally address it is in, by and large, a sex education health class. And I think, unfortunately, the approaches there are far too narrow. Rarely are young people asked to think about sex beyond bodies, risks, and protection. Rarely is intimacy, emotions, meaning, love addressed. Sex is really not just about the body, it's about the heart too. And so it really seemed to me that we needed a kind of a health and heart-based approach to sexual decision-making, and that it needed to be embedded into the larger context of relationships. And also, I think that provides deeper ways to motivate young people to avoid unplanned pregnancies, and reasons that, it gives them reasons that will continue to resonate after and beyond, you know, high school. And I think some of those new messages, particularly on pregnancy prevention, need to help youth consider the bigger picture, particularly how unplanned pregnancy impacts a child. So anyways, here we are. Think about it. The habits of heart are taking root in the teenage years. As they make their way into their 20s, into adulthood, they are going to be taking on one of the greatest challenges of their life, and that's finding a mate. Now, I'm not just saying this because most young people say that that is what they want. Surveys show most young people want to someday to find a lasting relationship, a loving partner. But they have to navigate this without models, without guidance, without good information, and without many social supports. I think, unfortunately, the guides that they do have today are often, by default, the internet, social media, their peers, and increasingly online porn. And I think there's a lot of confusion, misinformation, anxiety, and lots of high-cost missteps. And so my experience in the front row of young people's lives really has been what has led me to believe that comprehensive relationship education really is not fluff, but it's a central piece of helping young people succeed and achieve their aspirations. Now, before I sketch out what that might look like, I want to make a case for why I think it is really, really urgent. It's really needed today, in particular at this time in history. Now, I have three reasons. I think the first one, most people are probably pretty familiar with. We know that many young people simply do not have examples of healthy, stable relationships or marriages. That's missing for many youth. Now, I am not trying to glorify the past. There are a lot of positives to the diversity and freedoms that people now have. And there was a lot of ugliness behind closed doors before. But without models and without shared meanings and without some thoughtful conversations to pass on some wisdom and guidance, these are some big issues that involve big life steps. And many youth are really ill-informed. I mean, are there really no serious differences between living together and marriage? Is marriage just a piece of paper? Under what circumstances is living together more risky, less risky? Does it matter if the baby comes before marriage? And what about the roadmap for fatherhood? I work with a lot of young males who have their own histories of father absence. They really want to be good fathers, but they have really very little in the way of a working model. This is a generation that has grown up amidst the decline of marriage, the increase of divorce, the disappearance of fathers, and the dramatic increase of having children without marriage or before marriage, but increasingly without marriage. Many of our youth, many of the young people that I've taught over the years have parents who've never married or who have cycled through several parental relationships on both sides. And so growing up, they've experienced family instability and complexity as their parents have moved in and out of dating, cohabiting, marital, and step parenting relationships. Now, most of the young people I teach love their parents and respect their parents, but they themselves hope for a better and more successful love life. Now, I know maybe I'm sort of painting a bleak picture, and really, there's a lot of good news out there. Relationships and marriages and family life for a lot of people has never been better than it is today. We have more egalitarian relationships. We have more satisfying, more lasting marriages. We have more fathers that are totally involved with their children. Divorce has gone down, significantly so, and so has teen pregnancy. But here's the thing. These trends are not distributed equally. And that leads me to my second reason for why I think it's so urgent today. In some places, it's been called the Great Divide. There is a huge class and education divide in the trends today regarding intimate relationships and family life. And that divide is creating almost a caste system that perpetuates privilege on the one hand and disadvantage on the other hand. And this divide is creating two separate and unequal worlds for children. And the stakes are especially high for those young people who will not obtain a four-year college degree, and that's the majority. Only 37% of those between the ages of 25 and 35 have a four-year degree. So let's look at some of the numbers and trends, okay? Let's look at teen pregnancy. Now, that's pretty dramatic. It's gone down 60% since 1991. By the way, it's a little uneven. It's still much too high for Hispanics, African American youth, LGBTQ youth. But here's maybe a big issue that we need to look at. Unplanned pregnancy hasn't gone away. It's crept up the age scale. The majority of births to women under 30 today are to unmarried parents, and most of those pregnancies are unplanned. So here's the statistics on non-marital births. Today, well, we just have 2017 figures, but 2017, 40% of all babies were born to unmarried parents. You can see the breakdown here. It rises to 52 for Hispanic children and 70% for Black children. You might ask, well, so what? So what? So what if babies come before marriage or come without marriage? What if the parents are cohabiting or married? What's the big deal? Well, there is one, I think, really clear response to that, because non-marital births are strongly associated with greater child poverty and poor child outcomes. For a second here, I'd like to just read a little passage taken from a Child Trends research brief, a recent one, Unmarried Women, Indicators of Child and Youth Wellbeing. And I'm just going to read a passage out of there. Children born to unmarried mothers are more likely to grow up in a single-parent household themselves, experience unstable living arrangements, live in poverty, and have emotional and behavioral problems. As these children reach adolescence, they're more likely to have low educational attainment, engage in sex at a younger age, and have a birth outside of marriage. As young adults, children born outside of marriage are more likely to be idle, neither in school nor employed, have lower occupational status and income, and have more troubled marriages and more divorces than those born to married parents. Now, I think one important factor in understanding why, it's one factor, but it's a factor that we shouldn't overlook. But one factor has to do with parents' relationship. Now, certainly there are unmarried parents, there are cohabiting parents, they live happily ever after, they provide wonderful homes, stable homes for their children, but that's not the norm. By and large, non-marital births are strongly associated with relationship instability. Now, researchers have been studying the relationships of unmarried parents, particularly to see what happens to the relationship over time, what happens to parenting, what happens to children's well-being. And anyways, what we know is that most of the relationships of unmarried parents are generally fragile. Most will fall apart. They will be followed by new relationships. It's why families formed by the birth of a child to unmarried parents is called fragile families in the research literature. Multiple relationship transitions contributes to instability, to stress, and to greater poverty, and it can put children at risk for poorer outcomes. Our biggest, our most important study, the Fragile Family and Child Wellbeing Study out of Princeton and Columbia, found that multiple relationship transitions can negatively impact a mother's mental health. That in turn affects children. The more relationship transitions, that is associated with more maternal depression, more episodic binge drinking, and more substance abuse. Relationship transitions often mean residential moves. And it means that children are increasingly part of complex families where there are different relationships, there are different attachments, there are different legal obligations, there are different roles between the children and various adults. It all adds up to a lot of instability, which impacts child well-being. But by age 3, by the way, these kids in the study are now in their teenage years, but by age 3, researchers found that children's development in fragile families is already veering off track on all measures, health measures, cognitive measures, emotional and behavioral. But again, I think the big story here and why it's so urgent to help young people navigate their love lives is that there's this huge divide. You know, in trends in family formation, in a marriage and a divorce, those with the 4-year college degree on one side and those with less education on the other side. Very, very few women with a 4-year college degree have babies before marriage. We can look at non-marital childbearing by education, and you can see the vast difference here. 90% of the babies born to mothers with a 4-year college degree are married. Whereas if we go to associate degree, 43% of those babies are born to mothers, unmarried mothers with an associate degree, 59 high school, 62 less than high school. So I think where we're at is that the understanding of a connection, the benefits between forming a healthy relationship, a healthy marriage first before having a child, it just doesn't exist for many, many young people. And by the way, when I say marriage, I just would like to clarify that I'm speaking about a legal and social commitment. And for many couples, that often involves a spiritual, religious commitment too. But it's about, a commitment between two people, regardless of gender, identity, or sexual orientation. I mean, whatever, having a committed and loving partner with whom to raise a child just has a lot of benefits, financial, emotional, and social. Now, we can look at marriage rates, and that's also another place where you see this dramatic divide today. If you look over to the right-hand side of this chart here, what you see is that as women go up the educational ladder, their marriage rates go up. You can see, I don't have a pointer, I'm sorry. I was using my cursor on my screen. But you can see that the group it's going up for are the women who have a 4-year college degree. And you can see where it's continuing to go down is for women, young women with less education. And then we can do this. Again, as you go up even higher, bachelor's, can you see it on the right-hand side there? A bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, professional degree. The higher up the education, the marriage rates go up. I think, what really this shows is that women with education are not rejecting marriage. They're using their power to negotiate more egalitarian and healthy marriages. And I think there is something that most of us today recognize, and that is education for girls and women increases their power. Now, the same holds true for divorce. Divorce rates are falling. This is pretty significant. From 2008 to 2016, there's been an 18% drop. But when researchers break down the numbers, what they see is that decline is almost exclusively driven by college-educated millennials, those who are today in their late 20s to late 30s. They are marrying, and their marriages are lasting, and they tend to marry before they have children. But on the other side of the divide, what we see are non-marital births, serial cohabitation, and children with multiple partners. Those trends are replacing marriage for those without a 4-year college degree. And so drifting into unplanned pregnancy and parenthood without marriage is really becoming the norm among young adults without a 4-year college education. And that trend is strongly associated with increased child poverty, instability for children, and poor child outcomes. Again, so when I say children today are growing up in two separate and unequal worlds, this is a factor that plays into it. Now, what this says to me is that we have to help young people succeed in education. We have to help them succeed in training, employment preparation, career preparation, but we also need to do so much more to help them succeed at love. And it's really, it's not just, so it doesn't mess up their education and training, but young people, they really desire someday to find a loving and lasting relationship. Most young people say that this that they even say that marriage is something they value for themselves. A large chunk of young people, majority. They don't really want to repeat the instability that they experienced growing up. But the problem is most don't have good information. They don't have good skills, and they don't have good insights about choosing partners, about forming and maintaining to help them get what they want. Many are not aware of how and why putting a child before mutual commitment really matters. And most are not aware of how or why cohabitation, again, on average, doesn't generally offer the same benefits as marriage to parents and children. If we could offer more, really good research on, let's say, cohabitation, we could help young people make better decisions on when it's risky and when it's not, when it's more risky, when it's less risky. What it says to me is that it's really time to think more dualistically or even holistically about youth success. Yes, we've got to do everything we can to help youth obtain education and training and achieve good employment. But yes, we need to empower them with the confidence, built of knowledge and skills to navigate their love lives more safely and more wisely so it doesn't mess up and derail them. And so they can achieve their personal aspirations for love and connection. And it's really urgent now. The stakes are pretty high. This divide, it's really reproducing advantage and disadvantage. Now, I just have to digress for a moment because, myself, I'm somebody, I have spent literally my career focused on vulnerable youth, fragile families, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, ways that we can support youth and families, vulnerable, disconnected youth. And, a question that I have been asking myself for quite a while now is, are we ever going to find enough social workers, enough foster parents, enough mentors, enough school counselors, enough, fabulous teachers, enough community-based programming, enough big brothers and big sisters to make up for the lack of stable and healthy parental relationships? I mean, it takes a village, but it also takes a family. And a functioning, stable, healthy parental union really does help a kid. It's sort of like the infrastructure. It's an important infrastructure for family. And I think if we're truly to improve the outcomes for children, we have to help young people form healthy relationships and to ultimately, if they so choose, to have the marriages and families they aspire to. It's about achieving aspirations. It's not just about managing the damage. It's about helping youth achieve aspirations. Okay, a third reason that I think, it's really urgent today, extremely urgent today, is because the education about love and sex, really has been handed over to the popular culture, and that popular culture today is driven more and more by our often dysfunctional relationship with the internet, our mobile devices, social media. There are some pretty serious issues about how our hyper-connected lives, tethered to our gaming and mobile devices, how that's impacting our relationships, even our emotional and mental health. I think it's kind of uncharted territory. This is a generation that has never known a time of not being constantly connected. A Pew research study recently revealed that 45% of teens report being online almost constantly. Now, certainly, we don't have definitive research to show cause and effect. But I think we can say that, our mobile devices, the screen culture in general, it's really spread so much faster than our understanding of its impact. And I think there are some really serious questions that we have to ask and investigate further. Is it fueling a retreat from real relationships, real face-to-face human interaction? Is it fueling a retreat from intimacy? And why might that matter from the standpoint of gaining experience in relationships? And how do you form them? How do you maintain them? How do you end them? How do you start new ones? Or developing a healthy sexual life? I mean, there are some statistics that are kind of troubling. There's been a 40% decline in teens reporting they get together with their friends every day from 2000 to 2014. 45% of teens say they've never gone on a date. Teens are spending far more time at home and alone in their bedrooms. What does it all mean? Now, we do have a lot of research about the negative effects of social isolation. We have to ask, does it have anything to do with rising rates of teen and young adult depression and mental illness and even suicide? I mean, obviously, there's not one cause to all of these, but how does this figure in? And, ultimately, what does that lack of face-to-face, voice-to-voice interaction mean for the development of social and emotional intelligence, which we all know is so, so important? They're big, big questions. And of course, you can't talk about this without talking about a pretty disturbing and destructive trend, and that is the dramatic increase of violent and hardcore internet porn that's being consumed by young people. Now, let's be clear, I'm not talking about older vanilla porn. I'm talking about the porn of choking, of pulling hair, of pounding, of hurting, of humiliating a person. It's really not pretty. There's growing reports of sexual dysfunction in both males and females. For males, erectile dysfunction, difficulty with sexual arousal unless they're alone and in front of a screen. For females, clinicians are reporting that they're associating sex with pain, an increase in vaginal tears for females. I mean, if you're looking at porn as your model for what sex is about, I think it's really taking us to some seriously not so good places. And I think about it, wow. I mean, in my book, sex is supposed to be beautiful. It is supposed to be self-respecting. It's supposed to be affirming. It's supposed to be associated with mutual pleasure. I don't think this bodes well for a healthy future. So anyways, I guess to sort of end this part, I think there are numbers of teens and young adults that really are unprepared for caring, lasting romantic relationships and eventually healthy sexual lives. They get little guidance, formally or informally, from parents, teachers, and adults. But a high percentage of young people, they say they would like this. I mean, I've been asked to develop materials for websites and things like that where, they've done polling and surveying and focus groups of young people. And they say, talk to us about emotions, love, relationships. Many young people are interested in this. But I think few parents and teachers talk to teens and young adults in any great depth about the emotional aspects of a relationship, about love, about what mature love is, what it looks like, how it develops. How do you sustain healthy relationships? How do you avoid getting hurt? How do you deal with breakups? How do you basically fall in love with your brain turned on? And I think we talk even less about intimacy and sexual meaning. What do we know about the link between satisfying sex and healthy and mature relationships? And finally, what do healthy, parental relationships mean to children? And so those are some, I think, three kind of big reasons, especially 2 and 3, that really are kind of a clarion call that we should no longer look at this as just fluff or something we can ignore. It really is an important part of young people's lives. And so let me finish off with what I think comprehensive relationship ed can look like, because it is far more, again, than teaching young people how to avoid dating violence. It is far more, it includes that, but it's far more than that. And so here's my best shot at what I think some of the main themes of a comprehensive relationship education approach might look like. First of all, I think you really have to start with individuals. We need to help youth gain insight into themselves. If you don't know yourself, it's hard to know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what issues you have, what do you need to work on to grow. How has your past influenced who you are today? We need to even help them look at their family of origin patterns. What do they want for their own future? No one's past is their destiny. And in thinking about friends and romantic partners, what is important? What are your relationship expectations? I mean, my firm belief is that the healthier a person is, the more they are working towards who they want to be the healthier the relationships they're going to have. Then we need to impart everything we know about healthy relationships, what they are, what they aren't. We do have a knowledge base. We do have skills that can help young people navigate that crazy world of turn-ons and attractions and starting relationships. We can help young people understand more about the chemistry of attraction. You know, it's really quite powerful and it's quite fabulous. You know, it can really hijack you. How can you really enjoy it, but not be, you know, blindsided? Can we explore with young people how relationships develop? What qualities provide a good foundation and building blocks? Can we offer them guides for how to think about partners? You know, what are critical areas that you should be finding out in the first weeks or months when you're attracted to somebody? Can we help youth develop a more realistic concept of love? I think we can. What does mature love look like? Can we help young people become aware of the risks of sliding quickly into relation or sexual involvements? We can teach a low-risk strategy to reduce one's chances of getting attached to problem people and engage in risky behaviors. Also, young people need ways to assess their relationships. Should I stay? Should I go? Is it healthy? Is it not? And along with that, we need to build awareness of the red flags, early warning signs of dating violence. They need to gain practice in drawing that line of respect from the very beginning, early on. And they really need insights about breaking up. Many young people really swirl down into depression and all kinds of dark places around breakups. You know, how do you know when it's time? How do you do it? There are better ways and worse ways. How do you mend a broken heart? How do you move forward? When do you know to reach out for some real help? And also, too, just practice in making relationship decisions, even the smallest things like, do I want to kiss you? Do I want to say I'm in a relationship to be known as a couple? What information do I need to make these decisions? You know, all the way to sex or and further. Now, part of healthy relationship education must include communication and conflict management skills. We're really lucky today because we've got some really great research-based skills out there. And these are skills we know that are pretty critical to sustaining healthy relationships. Romantic, and of course these skills you know, have universal applicability to all relationships. And you know, it's really a whole package, from knowing what the destructive patterns are, learning skills to reduce those patterns, how to stop escalations before they go too far, how do you actually talk, and then how do you actually listen, how do you talk through difficult issues and problems, how do you raise complaints, how do you recognize, you know, things that push your buttons and hidden issues. There is a whole package here that I think I'd love to see every high school kid in America receive before they leave. And of course, you know, obviously we can't address relationships without exploring the good, the bad, and the absolute ugly of our hyper-connected lives. But we need savvy ways to do this. You can't lecture it. You know, we need to look for ways that we can engage youth in examining how does that affect our lives, our relationships, our ability to relate to one another? How does it impact our emotional, our social, our mental health, even our sexual health? Again, as I say, you can't lecture it. So, you know, we need activities, we need sort of ways of self-discovery and exploration, because ultimately we want young people to develop a personal policy on how to use it, when to use it, how much to use. You know, what's good about it, what's not so good about it. And finally, you know, another part of comprehensive relationship education excuse me, is about sexual decision making. But before we even get into sexual health information, I really like to put it after we've spent a lot of time on focusing on healthy selves and healthy relationships, because I think that really prepares young people to go into sexual decision making. But again, even before the health information, the sexual health information, I think we've got to have this heart part. You know, what about helping young people to reflect upon sexual meaning. You know, if I do this with somebody, you know, a kiss, an embrace, onto greater levels of physical sexual intimacy. What do I want each of those levels to mean? Can we deepen their understanding of intimacy? It's far more than physical. There are many ways to be intimately connected to somebody. And how does intimacy develop? And what do things like kindness and caring and love and dedication have to do with good sex? You know, for me, I think an important goal is to really provide, you know, really rich ways through stories, through music, through poetry, through film, through our own wisdom to really encourage youth to define. They've got to define it for themselves, a context and a timing for sex that's personally meaningful and that really protects their aspirations for their lives. You know, something that's going to put them more in charge, that challenges them to consider the issues when two people are not on the same page regarding meanings and intentions and values. I mean, the way that it is now, you know, the guides are just sort of, you know, the scripts of the popular culture. And then, of course, you know, young people need medically accurate information. They need skill practice and assertiveness. They need, you know, very concrete plans for the sexual choices they do make. And also, I think we need new pregnancy prevention messages that go a little bit wider, broader, where they can consider the big picture, especially how an unplanned pregnancy affects a child. I call it through the eyes of a child. You know, we need deeper ways to motivate young people. Most people aren't getting pregnant because they've never heard of a condom. You know, I think a deeper understanding and motivation can come from understanding why it really matters to a child to have parents that are committed to each other, parents that are a little more settled with education and employment. And I think this really reinforces the idea of planning. You know, you plan for your education, you plan for your future employment, but you plan also with your love life. And that kind of brings me to thinking about the success sequence. Or staying on track. And that's something that many people today are talking about, the need to actually teach the success sequence. I mean, it's sort of something that's implicit for those with a four-year college education, but it's not so implicit to many young people. Now, first of all, I just want to say that there's a lot of misconceptions about what the success sequence is all about. And so what I'm going to do for just a couple minutes is explain the most recent research by Wendy Wang and Brad Wilcox, because they analyzed a very, very large data set, came out a year ago, on 28 to 34-year-olds. And what they found is that a young person can increase their odds of landing in the middle to upper income levels if they follow a particular sequence or if they are on track. And what that means, those three steps are: have a high school diploma by age or equivalency by age 25, have full-time employment or be pursuing more education and training by age 25, be married before having a child. Or, I mean, as we know, not everybody is going to get married, not everybody desires to get married, not everybody has to get married, but also they looked at the data in terms of staying on track, and that sequence is number one. Number two, and avoiding an unplanned pregnancy, no marriage, no children. The data is really impressive. Just take a look at this chart. 86, 51 plus 35, it's 86. 86% of young adults who follow that sequence or who are on track are in the middle to upper income group. That data is really, really impressive. Now, also, what they did is that they also pulled out the data on young people growing up in different income levels, those that grew up low income, middle, and higher income. And it still really, really holds, succeeding with sequence. 91, you see the dark blue, that is growing up with lower income. 91% of those adults who followed the sequence or stayed on track are in the middle to higher income level by age 28 to 34. That's pretty impressive. Now, I think all of us know it's a heck of a lot easier to follow the success sequence or stay on track if you're born into advantage. We know there are more barriers. There's more hurdles. There's more challenges for those that are born with, disadvantages, less advantages. It is more challenging to finish high school. But still, we do everything in our power to still help and encourage all young people to finish high school. But what I'm thinking is that teaching about the success sequence is simply, it is one more way. It is one more reason. It is one more piece of motivation to avoid what's really, really important in this whole sequencing, and that is to avoid an unplanned pregnancy, to avoid, giving birth before you are more settled. And that is one thing that most young people have control over. Now, obviously, if you're trafficked or you're coerced, no, you don't. And by the way, I think it's really important to talk about that and to reach out. But for the majority of young people, avoiding an unplanned pregnancy is really possible. You don't have control over the income level of the family you were born in. You don't have control over the school, the neighborhood you live in. But you do have, and I think we do have to give that message. This is one thing you do have control over. On the one hand, you can decide not to have sex. You can decide you are waiting. You're going to avoid risky situations. You're going to strengthen your assertiveness skills. You can pace your involvements much more slowly. You can make real decisions. And on the other hand, if you're going to be sexually active, you can use contraception and condoms consistently. But I think it requires a lot of motivation and a lot of planning. And I have this sense that the more a young person is, is developing themselves, is building themselves up, the more they have learned, they're learning about forming healthy relationships, the more they learn about the advantages of waiting on a child until other things are in place. I think the more likely they are to make healthier relationship and sexual choices, the more likely they are to avoid an unplanned pregnancy. I mean, I really think unhealthy relationships, unequal, coercive, they're highly related to risky sexual behaviors. Now, by the way, the success sequence, I just want to say one last thing, because I think there has also been, again, a lot of misconceptions about the success sequence. I think some people think it's just this magical thinking, just tell young people to go get married, and that's the magic bullet, and they'll be successful. And that could not be furthest from the researchers who have done this work. And by the way, before Wang and Wilcox, we had Belle Sawhill and Ron Haskins from the Brookings. But the success sequence is ultimately about offering youth better access to all three things. Education, and for me, I'm talking 0 to 5, school readiness, initiatives to boost, school completion, training, apprenticeships, college, employment. We need to have more jobs that pay and pay better, and pathways to employment, career development, employment, workforce development. But we also need to provide greater access to healthy relationships and healthy marriages for those that desire. And that's where I think, this is an area, number 3, we really overlook. And so that is really my take on comprehensive relationship education, what it looks like. I would kind of throw out that I think another pretty important element is that with any initiative or program, we need to include parents and the caring adults in young people's lives. I think it's really important to offer connection activities that share content, that provide conversation starters. I mean, there really is a wealth of research by the Search Institute and elsewhere about parent-teen connectedness. I call it sometimes trusted adult, because not all young people have parents they can go to. But we need more conversations between youth and adults on matters of the heart. And I think a lot of adults, a lot of parents would really appreciate some conversation starters and maybe even some talking points. Anyways, to wind down, I just want to say that I think there is some pretty good evidence that this approach has positive effects. Love Notes, which is such it's a comprehensive relationship program, has been evaluated by researchers at the University of Louisville. It was a random assignment, 5-year study. And they specifically, in this study, wanted to compare comprehensive relationship education, Love Notes, against one of the leading health-based pregnancy prevention programs, reducing the risk. And Love Notes got great results, and it landed it on the Office of Adolescent Health, the OAH list of evidence-based pregnancy prevention programs. And what was really impressive is that it achieved a 46% reduction in pregnancy for both boys and girls at 12 months post-intervention. Also, I just want to say, I don't know if any other program got 5 outcomes in terms of the last time there was a big federal evaluation of pregnancy prevention programs. But we got 5 outcomes here, really positive. I mean, number one, the number of teens that stopped having sex. To me, that's success. I mean, if you're having sex and the relationship is pretty unequal and pretty unhealthy and pretty bad, it's a pretty good idea to stop having sex. Number 2, frequency of sexual activity. Number 3, those that were sexually active had increased their use of contraceptive use and consistency. And number 4 is also extremely interesting. Those that had not started sex, we had a bigger group that remained abstinent after. And of course, we got this big result in pregnancy, 46% decline. By the way, you could just see the last 3, because there was a control group and then reducing the risk in Love Notes. And you can see that pretty impressive results. And I guess what's also pretty impressive about this study is who the teenagers were that were in the study. And this was really a pretty vulnerable group of young people, 14 to, I believe they went up to 19, I could be wrong, it might be 17. But 21% were involved in out-of-home placements or were in out-of-home placements. 82% were low income, 16.6% were LGBTQ teens, 9.3% were refugees, 88% African American. So, it was tested, in a pretty important population. I'm just going to quickly say, there was an earlier study of a program I developed before Love Notes, and in fact, Love Notes is an adaptation of Relationship Smarts. This one took place a little while back, but it also, and this was before it had the sexual decision-making content in it, but it showed declines in aggression, less acceptance, but it also showed some pretty interesting improvements in understanding self and healthy relationships, and using those skills not only in dating relationships, but with parents and with peers. Marked increases in, the reporting of individual well-being, awareness of signs of abusive relationships. So I think that's pretty good. Now, last thing I want to say is, I think hopefully a lot of people that are listening in today, they reach youth. And there's lots of places, schools, community-based programs. I mean, any kind of setting that services youth, secular, religious, anything. But I think that if, in terms of larger policy and where the money goes and the investment goes, we have to really elevate on a societal level the understanding of the importance of intimate relationships on young people's lives. And that if we really want to help young people succeed, we can't ignore this area anymore. It has to be part of the mix. Now, also, I would say school is one place where we probably, in the health class in particular, is where we have the most universal reach, because most kids have to take health, and that is where most sex education resides. But I think we need to rethink health education a bit, and I think we have to almost remake sex education. Our approach to sexuality has to include the heart, and it should be embedded within this larger context of developing healthy relationships. And when I think about health classes, it's all the important things we do in health classes around nutrition and exercise exercise and tobacco and smoking and vaping and drugs and obesity and STI and pregnancy prevention and all these are such important things. But so is emotional, mental, and social health. And relationships are at the center of that. And so not to address romantic relationship, what is at the heart of many young people's emotional lives, and I would say physical lives too. And so in closing, I just think helping young people increase their relationship smarts really, really matters. We need to help them become deciders, planners, not drifters, with school, with career, and in love. And I think it's not just for them, but it's for the next generation, their children. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marlene. I think we actually do have a couple minutes for questions. And so the first question comes from Gloria. She said, since many youth are often online and on social sites, and that is unlikely to change, how can we harness the internet to reach them with information on love and healthy relationships?
Well, I think we have to we have to put some money into that, and we've got to hire some pretty savvy people, young adults that really understand the ins and outs of social media and the internet. It's. I think I can't do it because I have actually contributed some content for websites and web pages, but I can't say that I'm really the specialist there. But it comes down to, again, this whole thing. If we don't elevate an understanding to policymakers and the powers that be that fund initiatives, I mean, we first have to get people understanding how important this is and how ignoring this and leaving this out of the mix, is not okay if we really want to help them succeed. So, I don't have any answer except for we have to do a lot of work with people that have resources and monies, and we really have to hire some of the best and the brightest. I know that, like,
well, actually, Marlene, speaking of
I was just going to say the national campaign, the Power to Decide. I mean, they have a history of working, with Hollywood and things like that, with movies and programs and things like that. And, we have to work with YouTube. I mean, all that. But again, if we don't break out of the health paradigm, that it's all about, it's all about condoms and contraception. It's all about bodies. I mean, I think that's really important. I want every young people to be totally informed. But we've got to go deeper. I mean, we have to give people really, really good, reasons and ability and build their confidence and skills and being able to make choices for healthier relationships and healthier sexuality. It's not just about the body.
So you mentioned policymakers. So Rhonda actually had a question specifically about that. She said, how can we get involved in policy related to providing healthy relationship classes in schools? So do you have any thoughts for her?
I'll let you start, Aaron, and then I'll chime in.
So actually, Rhonda, one possible suggestion is here in the next few days, next few weeks, within a month or two, but definitely this year, there's going to be almost $50 million in federal funding for teen pregnancy prevention. And one of the eligible programs are the ones that Marlene has been talking about, the Love Knows program. And so one thing that you can do is not wait for the policymakers, but instead apply for that funding, take it to the schools, because one of the things that the policy really gets the attention of the policymakers is results. And so if you can actually take some of that federal funding, start delivering the services in the school, get those amazing outcomes that Marlene covered in terms of the research, then you can take that, armed with that, you can go to the policymakers and say, hey, we really need to get this going in the rest of our state. And so that's just one thought. And actually, it looks like we do have a few more questions, but we're going to need to email you after because we are out of time. And so, Marlene, if you could go to the next slide.
Oh, yeah. By the way, before I go to the next slide, please, we're not trying to cut you off. I mean, I'm sorry. I started writing this talk and thinking about what to say, and I really went on way too long. I know you're never supposed to lecture this long, and I'm really sorry. I hope it was worth it. But please, we take the questions and the comments really, really seriously. So please email them, and they will be sent to me. And you will get responses the best liability. Okay, next slide.
And then also, if you are interested in more information about those grants, you can always email me directly. So my email address is Aaron, Aaron, at dibblinstitute.org. And then, like it says on the screen, we'd like for you to stay in touch. We have a number of different ways that you can stay in touch with us on social media. And the next slide. And so this webinar, we'll actually have it up on our website within the next 3 days or so. So you can go back and review it and share it with colleagues. And then we also have a survey. As soon as you click out, we'd love for you to answer those questions to the survey. And the next slide. And then next month, we actually have a fascinating webinar. It's titled Rural versus Urban Youth. Are they really that different? And we have a number of great presenters. Tori Childs, Crystal Agnew, and Melissa Ballard are going to be joining us. And we'd love for you to join us next month as well. And so I hope you have a great day. And thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us for this webinar.